Dear Lord, please don't leave my mom in this darkness. I beg you, help her see the light again. Let her enjoy the vibrant colors of the world, the blooming flowers she adores so much. Let her hands be strong enough to work, her eyes clear enough to create the sketches she's always loved. Give me the strength to help her, to find a way to bring back her sight. I know, Lord, that you can make miracles happen. Please make one for her. Her voice cracked, the desperation clear even in the stillness of the room. She reached for the small, worn icon of the Virgin Mary, kissing it gently before placing it back on the nightstand. Emma's vision had begun to deteriorate months ago, and each passing day brought new challenges. Once a vibrant woman who adored painting and caring for their small garden, she now struggled to see even the simplest details. Emma tried to hide her fears, but Clara could see the pain and frustration written across her mother's face. The doctor's prognosis had been grim. Without immediate treatment, Emma would lose her sight completely. But the treatment cost more than Clara could fathom. That night, Clara drifted into a restless sleep. Her dreams carried her to a place of vivid light and joy, a vast hill under a golden sky. Dressed in flowing white, Clara stood barefoot, her voice rising into the air like a bird in flight. Below the hill, a crowd gathered, their faces filled with admiration as they threw flowers and cheered for her. And there, in the midst of it all, stood Emma. Her mother's eyes were clear, sparkling with the kind of happiness Clara hadn't seen in a long time. Emma waved, and Clara's heart soared. The dream filled her with a warmth that lingered even as the vision faded with the piercing sound of her alarm clock. When Clara awoke, the determination she felt in the dream hadn't left her. She sat up in bed, her dark hair tumbling over her shoulders, and whispered to herself, "I will sing for her. I will save her." The morning sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of the modest apartment Clara shared with her mother. The warmth of the light contrasted sharply with the cold reality of their situation. Clara watched Emma from the corner of her eye as she moved around the small kitchen. Her mother's hands worked deftly, peeling potatoes, but her face was turned slightly to the side, a habit she had developed as her vision worsened. "Good morning, sweetheart," Emma said, her voice soft but tinged with weariness. "Good morning, Mom," Clara replied, walking over to place a kiss on her cheek. Emma smiled briefly but didn't lift her eyes. Clara noticed how Emma had begun relying more on touch to navigate the room, her fingers brushing the counter as she moved. Clara hesitated before asking, "How are your eyes today, Mom?" Emma froze for a moment, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "Oh, they're fine," she replied, forcing a cheerful tone. But Clara wasn't fooled. The slight tremble in her mother's voice betrayed the truth. Emma sat down at the small wooden table, sighing deeply. "Clara, I'm sorry for all of this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't have to worry about things like this at your age. Her voice broke and she looked down, ashamed. "I don't want to be a burden." Clara knelt beside her, taking her mother's hands in hers. "Don't say that, Mom," she said firmly, her eyes welling with tears. "You're not a burden. You're my whole world. We'll figure this out together." Emma tried to smile, but the weight of her worries was evident. She had once been a vibrant woman who loved life's simple joys, painting flowers, working in the library, and spending hours in the garden. But now, her world was shrinking with every passing day, her vision growing dimmer. She hated the thought of relying on her teenage daughter, who deserved a carefree life filled with school, friends, and dreams. Clara, however, had no intention of letting her mother feel alone in her struggles. That morning, as Emma busied herself with breakfast, Clara slipped into her room. She opened her cookie tin, the one she had kept since childhood, and stared at the few coins inside. They were all she had saved from birthdays and small errands. She ran her fingers over the tin, thinking of the dream she'd had the night before. "I'll do it," Clara whispered to herself. "I'll sing for her." She spent the rest of the day planning. Her school books lay forgotten on the desk as she scribbled notes in her journal, brainstorming songs and places where she could perform. Clara had always loved singing. It was her escape, her joy. But now it wasn't just a passion, it was a mission. That evening she sat across from Emma at the dinner table. "Mom," Clara began carefully, "what if I got a part-time job? You know, just to help out a little." Emma looked up sharply. Absolutely not, she said, shaking her head. Your job is to focus on your studies, Clara. Don't worry about anything else. But Mom… No buts, Emma said firmly. You're already doing so much. I won't let you take on more. Clara bit her lip and nodded, deciding to keep her plan a secret. She would sing in the town square, earn money, and save for Emma's treatment, all without her mother knowing. It wasn't just about the money. It was about hope. Clara was determined to bring light back into Emma's world. Later that night, Emma sat in the living room, her eyes closed as she tried to rest. Clara watched her from the doorway, her heart heavy but resolute. She slipped on her jacket, grabbed the cookie tin, and whispered, I'll make things better for you, Mom. I promise. With that, Clara stepped out into the chilly evening air, ready to begin her journey to save the one person who meant everything to her. The sun was dipping below the horizon as Clara clutched her old cookie tin tightly in her hands, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and nerves. The town square was bustling with evening shoppers, families enjoying the crisp air, and workers hurrying to catch the last train home. Clara hesitated at the edge of the square, her shoes scuffing against the pavement as doubt crept in. What if no one listens? She whispered to herself. What if I'm just wasting time? But then she thought of her mother, Emma, sitting alone at home, trying to peel vegetables with failing eyesight. The memory of Emma's quiet sighs and forced smiles gave Clara the courage she needed. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the square. Clara found a spot near the shopping plaza where the crowd was thickest. She placed the cookie tin on the ground in front of her and smoothed her dress nervously. Her fingers trembled as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The first song she chose was a lullaby her mother used to sing to her, soft and simple, but filled with emotion. Her voice started off shaky, barely rising above the chatter of the crowd. But as the melody flowed, Clara closed her eyes and let herself get lost in the music. Her voice grew stronger, more confident, as it carried over the noise of the bustling square. A few heads turned. A child tugged on her mother's sleeve, pointing at Clara. A couple paused mid-step to listen. But then came the crushing realization. No one was stopping to donate. The cookie tin remained empty, save for a stray leaf that had blown into it. Clara's heart sank, but she didn't stop singing. If nothing else, she was determined to finish her song. As she ended the final note, a man in a dark uniform approached her. The stern look on his face made Clara's stomach twist. He was a security guard for the shopping plaza, and he didn't look happy. "What's going on here?" the guard asked, his voice gruff and authoritative. "You can't just loiter around here and make noise." "I'm not loitering," Clara said softly, her voice trembling. "I'm just singing. I'm not doing anything wrong." The guard crossed his arms, his gaze narrowing. "This is private property. You're disturbing the customers. Go home, kid, or I'll call your parents." I just… Clara stammered, tears welling in her eyes. She bent down to pick up her cookie tin, which was still heartbreakingly empty. The guard softened for a moment, seeing the disappointment etched on Clara's young face, but his job was his job. "Go on now," he said, not unkindly. "You shouldn't be out here alone anyway." Clara nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat, and shuffled away from the plaza. The evening breeze stung her cheeks, or maybe it was her tears. She had failed. All the courage it had taken to stand there and sing in front of strangers had amounted to nothing. As she wandered aimlessly through the quieting streets, she found herself drawn toward the river. The soft lapping of the water against the shore was soothing, and the air smelled of damp earth and faintly of flowers. There was a wooden platform near the edge of the river, often used by young people as a gathering spot. Tonight, it was mostly empty, save for a couple sitting under a tree and a group of teenagers laughing in the distance. Clara hesitated, then decided to try one more time. She set her tin down and began to sing again, her voice carrying across the water. The river acted as a natural amplifier, the acoustics enhancing her pure melodic tones. The couple under the tree turned to watch her, their conversation forgotten. A few of the teenagers in the distance paused, their laughter fading as they listened. This time, Clara felt the magic of the moment. She sang with her whole heart, imagining Emma's smile, the way her eyes used to light up before her vision dimmed. Her voice was filled with emotion, love, hope, and a deep longing for a better future. When she finished her song, there was a moment of silence, followed by soft clapping. The couple approached her, the woman digging into her purse to drop a few coins into Clara's tin. "You have a beautiful voice, dear," she said kindly. "Don't give up." "Thank you," Clara whispered, her cheeks flushing with a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. A few others tossed coins her way before walking off, but the amount was meager, barely enough to buy a loaf of bread, let alone contribute to Emma's treatment. Clara sat on the edge of the platform, her legs dangling over the water as she stared into the tin. The coins clinked softly as she shook it. "This is hopeless," she muttered to herself, her voice barely audible over the sound of the river. But deep down she knew she couldn't give up. Not yet. That night, as Clara walked home under the pale light of the moon, she made a promise to herself. She would keep singing, no matter how long it took. Her mother's life was worth every ounce of effort she could give. Even if it meant facing rejection again and again, she would find a way to save Emma. And so, with her cookie tin clutched tightly in her hands, Clara stepped through the door of their little apartment, determined to try again the next day. The river had become Clara's sanctuary. Every day after school she would head there with her cookie tin, finding solace in the peaceful flow of water and the echo of her own voice across the ripples. Though the coins she collected were modest, Clara clung to the hope that her perseverance would pay off. Her mother's fading eyesight left her little choice but to keep trying. It was late one evening when Clara decided to sing one last song before heading home. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of pink and gold in the sky. She stood beneath a large oak tree near the riverbank, her feet planted firmly on the wooden platform. The world around her seemed to fade away as her voice lifted into the evening air, carrying with it all the emotions she held inside: hope, fear, love, and longing. A few passers-by slowed their steps to listen. Some dropped coins into her cookie tin, but most simply smiled before moving on. Clara's voice, soft yet powerful, filled the space like the faint glow of a candle in the darkness. Her heart swelled as she finished her song, the final note lingering in the air like a whisper of hope. "Bravo," a deep voice said from behind her, startling Clara out of her reverie. She spun around to see a tall man in an impeccably tailored suit standing at the edge of the platform. His gray hair was neatly combed, and he carried an air of confidence that immediately set him apart from the usual crowd. In one hand, he held a leather briefcase, and in the other, a smartphone he had just slipped into his pocket. "Thank you," Clara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She bent down to pick up her cookie tin, suddenly self-conscious about its pitiful contents. The man stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking softly against the wooden planks. "Your voice is remarkable," he said, his tone warm but inquisitive. "What's a young girl like you doing singing out here by herself?" Clara hesitated, unsure if she should tell him the truth, but something about his kind eyes and genuine curiosity made her decide to open up. "I'm trying to raise money for my mother's medical treatment," she admitted. "She's losing her eyesight and we can't afford the surgery she needs." The man's expression softened, a flicker of sympathy crossing his face. "That's a heavy burden for someone so young," he said, his voice gentle. "You shouldn't have to shoulder it alone." Clara shrugged, clutching the tin tightly against her chest. "She's my mom," she said simply. "I'll do whatever it takes." The man nodded, clearly moved by her determination. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara," she replied. "And you?" "Henry Moore," he said, extending his hand. Clara hesitated for a moment before shaking it, his firm grip reassuring her. "I own a bar not far from here. It's called Insight. Have you heard of it?" Clara nodded vaguely. She had walked past it once or twice but had never gone inside. It seemed like a place for adults, far removed from the quiet corners of her world. Henry smiled. "Your voice deserves a bigger audience, Clara. I'm not just saying that. You have real talent. If you're willing, I'd like you to perform at my bar. I'm confident the customers would love to hear you sing." Clara's eyes widened in surprise. "Perform? In a bar?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. Henry chuckled. "Don't worry. It's a respectable place and I'd make sure you're safe. Plus, I'd pay you fairly for your time. You could earn far more singing there than you ever would on this platform." Clara hesitated, the offer both thrilling and intimidating. "But what about my mom?" she asked, her voice trembling. "She needs the money for treatment, not just small wages." Henry's smile softened into something more earnest. "That's the other part of my offer," he said. "My uncle is a highly regarded eye surgeon in the city. If you agree to sing at my bar, I'll arrange for your mother to be treated by him. I'll cover all the costs." Clara stared at him, her mind racing. Was this some kind of dream? Could a stranger really be this kind and generous? She wanted to believe him, but the weight of her responsibilities made her cautious. "Why would you do that for me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Henry shrugged, his expression thoughtful. "Let's just say I know what it's like to need a little help," he said. "And sometimes, helping someone else is its own reward." Clara studied his face, searching for any sign of dishonesty, but found none. His sincerity felt genuine, and the mention of his uncle, a renowned surgeon, gave her a glimmer of hope she hadn't felt in weeks. "I don't know," she murmured, her gaze dropping to the cookie tin in her hands. "I've never done anything like this before." Henry smiled again, his confidence reassuring. "I'll help you every step of the way," he promised. "You don't have to decide right now. Take some time to think about it. But if you're ready to make a change, I think we can make something incredible happen." Clara nodded slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll think about it." Henry reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it to her. "Call me when you're ready," he said. "And don't worry, we'll make sure your mother gets the help she needs." With that, he turned and walked away, his polished shoes clicking against the wooden platform. Clara stood there for a long moment, staring at the card in her hand. The name Henry Moore was printed in bold letters, along with a phone number and the name of the bar. Clara's mind swirled with possibilities. Could this be the answer to her prayers? She glanced back at the river, the fading light casting golden reflections on the water. For the first time in weeks, a tiny spark of hope flickered in her heart. The following days were a whirlwind for Clara as she prepared for her first ever performance at Henry's bar, Insight. Although excitement buzzed within her, so did a steady undercurrent of nerves. Singing by the river, hidden under the open sky, had been a private world she controlled. But standing in front of a crowd in a bar felt like stepping into uncharted territory. Henry had arranged everything. His assistant, Laura, was assigned to help Clara transform into what he called a star in the making. Laura was a cheerful, stylish woman in her late 20s who immediately took Clara under her wing. With her bubbly energy and warm encouragement, Laura managed to turn the preparation process into something fun, even for the apprehensive teenager. "First things first," Laura said, setting a makeup bag and a small jewelry case on the counter in Henry's office. "We need to come up with a stage name, something captivating." Clara hesitated, unsure how to answer. "Do I really need a stage name?" she asked timidly. "Why can't I just be Clara?" Laura smiled, brushing back a strand of Clara's hair. "It's not just about the name. It's about creating a little mystery," she explained. "Besides, you're young and we need to protect your privacy. A stage name keeps things professional." Henry, seated nearby, nodded in agreement. "I've thought of one," he said, leaning forward. "What about Nightingale?" Clara blinked. "Nightingale," she repeated, trying the name on her tongue. "Why?" "Because your voice reminds me of one," Henry said with a soft smile. "The nightingale sings before storms and under the moonlight, often in the quiet of night. It's a perfect name for someone whose voice can move people's hearts, even in the darkest times." Clara considered it for a moment and then nodded. "Okay," she said, smiling faintly. "Nightingale it is." With her new name decided, Laura set to work on her appearance. She styled Clara's hair into soft waves and applied light makeup, giving her a mature yet natural look. To complete the transformation, she handed Clara a simple black mask that covered the upper half of her face. "The mask will give you an air of mystery," Laura explained, fastening the straps behind Clara's head. "It'll make people focus on your voice, not your age or appearance. Plus, it's elegant, like you." Clara stared at her reflection in the mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The mask transformed her into someone new, someone confident and bold. "It's perfect," she murmured. That evening, Clara stepped into Insight for the first time. The bar was warm and inviting with soft lighting, polished wooden tables, and a small stage set against the far wall. Patrons chatted quietly over drinks, their conversations creating a low hum of energy. Henry greeted Clara at the door, his reassuring smile calming her nerves. "You're going to do great," he said. "Just remember, this is no different than singing by the river. Close your eyes if you have to. Let the music take over." Clara nodded, gripping the hem of her dress as her nerves swirled. Laura led her to the back of the bar where she waited behind the curtains as the current act finished. Her heart pounded in her chest as she heard the crowd clap politely for the departing performer. Henry stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying a warm authority, "tonight we have a very special performance. Please welcome to the stage, Nightingale." A ripple of applause moved through the bar as the curtains parted. Clara stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly as she approached the microphone. The soft glow of the stage lights illuminated her figure, casting a golden hue over her. For a moment she hesitated, her eyes scanning the room. Dozens of faces stared back at her, curious and expectant. She closed her eyes briefly, taking a deep breath to steady herself. Then she began to sing. The first note was soft, like a whisper carried on the wind. As the melody grew, so did Clara's confidence. Her voice, rich and clear, filled the room, weaving through the air like a delicate thread. The crowd fell silent, captivated by the unexpected depth and beauty of her performance. Clara lost herself in the song, her nerves melting away as she poured her heart into every note. Her voice soared effortlessly, carrying a raw emotion that resonated with everyone listening. The lyrics spoke of love, hope, and resilience, universal themes that touched even the hardest of hearts. When the song ended, the room erupted into applause. Clara opened her eyes, startled by the intensity of the response. People were clapping enthusiastically, some even rising to their feet. The warmth of their appreciation washed over her, filling her with a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in years. By the end of the night, Clara had performed 3 songs, each met with increasing enthusiasm. Henry watched proudly from the back of the room, his instincts about her talent fully vindicated. Laura stood beside him, grinning ear to ear. The patrons began dropping generous tips into the collection jar on the stage. Some even approached Clara after the performance, praising her voice and asking when she would perform again. "You have a gift, young lady," an older man said, placing a $50 bill in her jar. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Clara thanked him, her cheeks flushing with gratitude. The night had been more successful than she could have imagined. As she packed up to leave, Henry approached her, his smile warm. "You did it, Nightingale," he said. "Tonight was just the beginning. You're going to do great things. I can feel it." Clara smiled, clutching the jar of tips tightly in her hands. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to hope that her mother's treatment might truly become a reality. The next morning, Clara woke up to the golden rays of sunlight streaming through her bedroom window. Her heart still fluttered with the energy of the previous night, and the sound of applause seemed to echo faintly in her ears. The tips she'd earned sat in a neat pile on her desk, a small but significant step toward her mother's treatment. Clara picked up the jar, running her fingers over the cool glass, and smiled. She was finally doing something that could make a difference. At breakfast, Clara prepared a tray for her mother, Emma, who was still resting in bed. Despite Emma's usual insistence on independence, her recent decline in vision had made it difficult for her to navigate the simplest tasks. Clara carried the tray into her mother's room, where soft morning light filtered through the curtains. "Good morning, Mom," Clara said cheerfully as she placed the tray on the bedside table. Emma stirred and smiled weakly. "Good morning, sweetheart. You're up early. Did you sleep well?" Clara nodded, sitting beside her. "I did, Mom. How are you feeling today?" Emma sighed, her clouded eyes looking out the window. "The same. It's hard to tell what time of day it is anymore." She paused, turning toward her daughter with a soft smile. "But your voice always brightens my mornings." Clara swallowed the lump forming in her throat. She reached out and took Emma's hand in hers. "Mom, things are going to get better. I promise." Emma squeezed her hand but said nothing. Clara hesitated, unsure how to tell her mother about the opportunity that had come her way. Would Emma approve of her singing in a bar? Would it upset her to know that Clara was working so hard to raise money for her treatment? Clara decided to wait a little longer before revealing the truth. Later that day, Clara met Henry outside their home. The sun was high in the sky as he arrived in his sleek black car, ready to take Emma to the eye clinic. Henry stepped out, carrying a clipboard and a reassuring smile. "Good afternoon, Clara," he greeted. "Are you ready?" Clara nodded, glancing nervously at her mother, who stood by the doorway with a faint look of uncertainty on her face. Emma had agreed to the clinic visit after Henry introduced himself as a representative of a charitable organization that assisted families in need. Clara had worked with Henry to ensure the explanation sounded plausible, and Emma had reluctantly accepted, believing it to be her best chance at recovery. Henry approached Emma gently. "Mrs. Moore will take excellent care of you. The clinic is one of the best in the region, and the doctors there are optimistic about your treatment." Emma gave him a weak smile, still unsure. "I just hope I'm not wasting anyone's time," she said softly. "You're not," Clara interjected, her voice firm. "You deserve this, Mom. Please trust me." Emma hesitated, then nodded. "All right, then. Let's go." The drive to the clinic was quiet, with Emma sitting in the back seat while Clara rode up front with Henry. The journey took them through the bustling city, and Clara couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the towering buildings and busy streets. It was a world so different from their modest life in the small town. When they arrived at the clinic, Henry escorted Emma inside while Clara stayed behind, clutching her hands tightly in her lap. She wanted to be by her mother's side, but Henry had assured her that Emma would receive the best care, and that it was better for Clara to focus on her performances. Hours later, Henry returned to the car, his expression bright. "Good news," he said. "The doctors are optimistic about her treatment. She'll need to stay at the clinic for a while, but they've already begun the first round of injections. It's going to take time, but they're confident she'll regain her vision." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Really? She'll be able to see again?" Henry nodded. "Yes, Clara. You've given her a real chance." Over the next few weeks, Clara's life became a delicate balancing act. She threw herself into her performances at Insight, singing her heart out every Friday and Saturday night. The bar became her second home, and she found herself growing more comfortable on stage with each passing week. The patrons adored her, and her tips grew steadily, inching her closer to her goal. During the weekdays, Clara focused on school, determined not to let her education slip despite her busy schedule. Her teachers noticed her growing exhaustion, but admired her tenacity. Laura often stepped in to help Clara manage her time, acting as both a mentor and a friend. Emma's condition began to improve at the clinic. She called Clara every evening, her voice growing stronger with each conversation. "The doctors say my eyesight is coming back little by little," Emma said one night, her tone brimming with hope. "Clara, I don't know how to thank you for all you've done." "You don't have to thank me, Mom," Clara replied, her heart full. "I'm just so glad you're getting better." One Friday evening, after another successful performance at Insight, Clara sat backstage with Laura, counting her tips for the night. The jar was nearly full, and Clara felt a surge of pride. "You're really making a difference, you know," Laura said, smiling warmly. "Not just for your mom, but for everyone who listens to you. Your voice is a gift, Clara." Clara looked down at the bills and coins in her hands, her emotions bubbling to the surface. "It's not just my voice," she said softly. "It's hope. That's what I'm singing for. Hope for my mom, for myself, for a better future." Laura reached out and squeezed Clara's hand. "And that hope is what makes you unforgettable." As Clara left the bar that night, walking home under a blanket of stars, she felt a quiet confidence settling in her heart. Her journey was far from over, but for the first time, she believed she could see it through. Her mother's hope and her own was finally beginning to bloom. The night air was crisp, and the dim glow of streetlights cast long shadows on the cobblestone road as Clara left Insight after another successful performance. Her feet moved quickly, eager to get home and call her mother Emma at the clinic. It had become her ritual to share her day with Emma before bed, a moment of connection that kept them both going. The tin box in her hands jingled softly, the coins inside a comforting reminder of her progress toward saving her mother's sight. Clara turned a corner onto a quieter street when she heard a voice calling out behind her. "Excuse me, young lady, can you help me?" She stopped and turned, spotting an older woman leaning out of a car parked by the curb. The woman's face was wrinkled, and her gray hair was tied back in a loose bun. She waved her hand as if beckoning Clara closer. "What's the matter, ma'am?" Clara asked, stepping hesitantly toward the car. "My phone fell under the seat and I just can't reach it," the woman said with a strained voice. "Would you mind helping me? My back isn't what it used to be." Clara hesitated. Something about the situation felt off, but the woman's frail appearance tugged at her sense of compassion. She stepped closer to the open car door, leaning in slightly to peer under the seat. "Where did it fall?" Clara asked, crouching. "Just a little further," the woman said, her voice suddenly cold. Before Clara could react, she felt a sharp pain at the back of her head, and darkness overtook her. When Clara regained consciousness, she found herself lying on the back seat of the car, her wrists bound tightly with coarse rope, and her mouth sealed with duct tape. Her heart raced as she struggled to move, but her limbs felt heavy and uncoordinated. The hum of the car engine and the rhythmic crunch of gravel beneath the tires told her they were driving down a remote road. The older woman sat in the driver's seat, her expression cold and unyielding. She didn't glance back at Clara, as if she were nothing more than a parcel to be delivered. The car's interior smelled faintly of old leather and mildew, and the faint moonlight streaming through the windows only heightened Clara's sense of dread. Tears welled up in her eyes as fear gripped her. What is happening? Where is she taking me? What about my mom? Thoughts tumbled through her mind in a panicked spiral, but the tape over her mouth muffled her cries for help. After what felt like an eternity, the car came to a jerking stop on a narrow dirt road surrounded by dense forest. The woman opened the car door, her movements deliberate and eerily calm. "Get out!" she barked, yanking the back door open. Clara hesitated, her bound wrists trembling as she tried to sit up. The woman grabbed her arm roughly, pulling her out of the car and onto the cold, hard ground. Clara winced as her knees scraped against the gravel. "Move!" the woman commanded, pointing toward a narrow path that led into the dark woods. Clara stumbled forward, her heart pounding in her chest. The shadows of the towering trees loomed around her, their branches reaching like skeletal hands toward the sky. The only sounds were the crunch of leaves beneath her feet and the distant call of an owl. The night felt suffocating, each step dragging her further into an abyss of uncertainty. "Why are you doing this?" Clara tried to say, but the words were muffled by the tape. Her captor didn't answer, only prodding her forward with a sharp stick. As they walked deeper into the forest, Clara's mind raced. She had to escape, but her hands were bound, and her captor showed no signs of weakness. Suddenly, a low growl broke through the oppressive silence. Clara froze, her eyes darting around the darkness. The growl grew louder, accompanied by the crunch of leaves and snapping of twigs. The older woman cursed under her breath, turning toward the sound. "Probably a coyote," she muttered, tightening her grip on Clara's arm. But Clara knew better. This wasn't the sound of a lone predator. It was something bigger. The growling grew closer, and Clara's heart leapt when a large shape emerged from the shadows. A massive St. Bernard bounded into the clearing, its sharp eyes glowing in the moonlight. The dog's growl turned into a bark, loud and commanding, as it positioned itself between Clara and her captor. "What the—" the woman started, but before she could finish, a man's voice boomed from the darkness. "Sam! Stay!" A figure stepped into the clearing, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. Clara squinted, recognizing the man as Adam, the recluse she'd heard whispers about in town. He carried a sturdy walking stick and had a stern but kind expression as he took in the scene before him. "What's going on here?" Adam demanded, his voice steady and authoritative. His eyes landed on Clara, bound and terrified, and his jaw tightened. The older woman stammered, trying to explain. "It's none of your business. She's my niece. I'm just taking her home." Adam raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Funny. She doesn't look like she wants to go with you?" He turned to Clara. "Is that true?" Clara shook her head furiously, tears streaming down her face. Adam's gaze hardened as he stepped forward, his presence towering and unrelenting. "You have 5 seconds to leave," he said, his voice low and menacing. or I let Sam handle this." The woman hesitated, her eyes darting between Adam and the growling dog. She muttered a string of curses before retreating to her car, slamming the door and speeding away into the night. As the taillights disappeared, Clara collapsed to her knees, sobbing with relief. Adam knelt beside her, gently removing the tape from her mouth and untying the ropes around her wrists. "You're safe now," he said softly, his voice a stark contrast to the one he'd used moments earlier. "Let's get you out of here." Sam wagged his tail, nuzzling Clara's hand as if to reassure her further. Clara managed a weak smile, stroking the dog's thick fur. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at Adam. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come." Adam offered her a hand, helping her to her feet. "Let's not think about that," he said. "Come on, my cabin isn't far. You can rest there for the night." Clara nodded, too exhausted to argue. As they made their way through the forest, the weight of the ordeal began to lift, replaced by a newfound gratitude for the kindness of a stranger and his loyal companion. Clara sat on a simple wooden chair in Adam's cozy cabin, wrapped in a thick woolen blanket. The warmth from the crackling fireplace seeped into her bones, slowly melting the cold fear that had gripped her just hours earlier. The cabin was small but welcoming, with shelves lined with books and jars of dried herbs. Sam, Adam's St. Bernard, lay by her feet, his watchful eyes never leaving her. Adam handed her a steaming mug of herbal tea. "This will help calm your nerves," he said, his voice kind but steady. Clara accepted it with a trembling hand, offering him a faint smile of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. I don't even know how to explain what happened tonight." Adam pulled up a chair across from her and sat down, his rugged face etched with concern. "Take your time," he said. "Start from the beginning." Clara recounted the events of the night, the mysterious woman who lured her into the car, the terrifying drive into the forest, and the overwhelming fear of what might have happened if Adam and Sam hadn't intervened. As she spoke, her voice wavered, but Adam listened intently, his expression unreadable. When she finished, Clara took a deep breath and sipped her tea, the soothing warmth grounding her. Adam leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed. "You've been through more tonight than most people do in a lifetime," he said. "But you're safe now. That's what matters." Clara nodded, her eyes darting around the room. The cabin's rustic charm reminded her of a storybook, a place where someone might retreat to escape the world. It was comforting, but also lonely. "Do you live here all by yourself?" she asked, her voice soft. Adam smiled faintly. "I do. It's quiet, and I like it that way. Sometimes life in town feels overwhelming." Clara tilted her head, studying him. There was a sadness in his eyes, a weight that seemed to press down on him even as he sat still. "Why do you live out here, away from everyone?" she asked gently. Adam hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Let's just say I've had my fair share of heartache," he said finally. "This place gives me space to think, to heal." Clara wanted to ask more, but something in his tone stopped her. Instead, she said, "It's a beautiful cabin. It feels safe." A flicker of warmth crossed Adam's face. "That's the idea," he said. "Everyone needs a place where they can feel safe." The conversation shifted to lighter topics: Sam's antics in the forest, the books on Adam's shelves, and Clara's love of singing. Slowly, the tension in the room eased, and Clara found herself smiling again. "I sing at a bar called Insight," she said, setting her empty mug on the table. "It's to help pay for my mom's treatment. She's losing her eyesight." Adam's expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that. How's she doing?" "She's in a clinic now thanks to someone who believed in me," Clara said. "I just want her to get better. She's my whole world." Adam nodded, his gaze distant. "A mother's love is a powerful thing," he said quietly, "and so is a daughter's." Something in his voice caught Clara's attention. She studied his face, her heart skipping a beat as a thought surfaced. There was something familiar about him, his eyes, his voice. It was like a melody she couldn't quite place. "Adam," she said hesitantly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," he replied, his brow furrowing slightly. "Did you ever know someone named Emma?" The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Adam froze, his eyes locking onto hers. The room seemed to grow still, the crackling fire the only sound. For a long moment, he didn't speak, his expression a mix of shock and disbelief. "Emma," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I knew her. He paused, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "I loved her, but she disappeared years ago, without a word. I never saw her again." Clara's breath caught in her throat. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, her heart racing as the realization hit her. "She's my mom," Clara said, her voice trembling. "Emma is my mom." Adam's eyes widened, the weight of her words sinking in. He leaned forward, his face a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Your mother? Emma, are you sure?" Clara nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "She told me about you. She said she left because she didn't want to hold you back." Adam's jaw tightened, and he looked away, his hands clenching into fists. "She thought she was holding me back," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've spent years wondering why she left. I thought I wasn't enough. But it was never about that, was it?" Clara shook her head, her own tears spilling over. "She loved you. I know she did. But she was scared. And she didn't know how to face it." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air was heavy with unspoken emotions, the past and present colliding in a way neither could have anticipated. Finally, Adam stood, his movements slow and deliberate. He crossed the room and knelt in front of Clara, his eyes searching hers. "Clara," he said softly, "I don't know how to say this, but I think I might be your father." Clara's breath hitched and she nodded. "I think so too." Adam reached out, his hands trembling slightly as he rested them on her shoulders. "I've missed so much," he said, his voice breaking. "But if you'll let me, I want to be there for you. For both of you." Clara threw her arms around him, her tears soaking into his shirt. "We've been waiting for you," she whispered. "Mom and I, we've been waiting." As dawn broke over the forest, Adam drove Clara home. The light of the rising sun bathed the road in gold, and for the first time in years Adam felt a spark of hope. There was still so much to say, so much to mend. But as he glanced at Clara beside him, he knew one thing for certain. His family was within reach, and he wasn't going to let them slip away again. Clara sat at the kitchen table, her fingers nervously tapping against the worn wood. Across from her, Emma stared at the teacup in her hands, swirling the contents absently. The air was thick with tension, the weight of Clara's revelation pressing down on both of them. "Mom," Clara began, her voice tentative, "I need to tell you something. Something important." Emma looked up, her pale eyes soft but tired. "What is it, sweetheart? You've been quiet since you came home." Clara took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I met someone in the woods. He saved me. His name is Adam." Emma's hands stilled, the teacup frozen mid-air. Her expression shifted, a flicker of recognition sparking in her eyes. "Adam?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Clara nodded, her heart pounding. "He said he knew you, that you were close once." Emma set the cup down slowly, her hands trembling. I don't understand. How did you meet him? Why were you in the woods?" Clara quickly recounted the harrowing events of the night before, her abduction, Adam's rescue, and their conversation in his cabin. She watched her mother's face closely, searching for a reaction. When she finished, Emma sat back in her chair, her gaze distant. "Adam," she said again, the name carrying a weight of emotion Clara couldn't fully grasp. "I never thought I'd hear that name again." Clara leaned forward, her voice urgent. "Mom, he's still here. He's been waiting for answers. For you. He doesn't even know why you left." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes, and she shook her head. "I thought it was the right thing to do," she said, her voice breaking. "I loved him so much, but I was scared. I thought I'd ruin his life." "Ruin his life?" Clara asked, her brow furrowing. "Mom, he's been waiting for you all these years. He never moved on. He still loves you." Emma's tears spilled over and she buried her face in her hands. I didn't know, she sobbed. I thought he'd forget me. I thought he'd find someone better. Clara reached across the table, taking her mother's hands in hers. Mom, you deserve happiness, and so does he. It's not too late. Emma looked up, her tear-streaked face filled with uncertainty. Do you really think he'd want to see me, after all this time? Clara smiled softly. I know he does. And I think you owe it to both of you to find out. Later that evening, Clara stood at the door watching as Adam's car pulled into the driveway. Her heart raced as she saw him step out, his gaze flicking to her with a mixture of anticipation and nervous energy. She's inside, Clara said quietly, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling within her. She wants to see you. Adam nodded, his face pale but determined. Thank you, Clara, he said, for bringing us back together. Clara stepped aside, letting him into the house. The moment Adam stepped into the living room, Emma turned, her eyes widening as they landed on him. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the years of separation stretching between them like an unbridgeable chasm. Finally, Adam broke the silence. Emma, he said, his voice trembling. It's been a long time. Emma's lip quivered, and she took a hesitant step forward. Adam, she whispered. I didn't think I'd ever see you again. Adam crossed the room in 2 long strides, stopping just short of her. His eyes searched hers, filled with questions and emotions too complex to name. Why? He asked simply. Why did you leave? Emma's tears flowed freely now, and she reached for his hands, her fingers trembling as they touched his. I was scared, she admitted. I thought I wasn't good enough for you, that I'd hold you back. And when I found out about Clara, I didn't know how to face it. I thought you'd be better off without us. Adam shook his head, his grip on her hands tightening. Better off? Emma, you were my world. I've spent all these years wondering what I did wrong, what I could have done to make you stay. Emma sobbed, her shoulders shaking. You didn't do anything wrong, it was me. I was too afraid to believe I deserved you. Adam pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as if afraid she might disappear again. You always deserved me, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And I never stopped loving you. Clara watched from the doorway, tears streaming down her face. The sight of her parents reunited, their love rekindled after years of heartache, filled her with a joy she couldn't put into words. That night, the 3 of them sat together in the living room, talking late into the night. Adam shared stories of his life in the city, his work as a doctor, and the quiet loneliness that had brought him to the forest. Emma told him about raising Clara, the struggles she'd faced, and the moments of joy that had kept her going. Clara listened, her heart full as she watched her parents reconnect. For the first time in her life, she felt the weight of their shared history and the hope of the future they could now build together. As the clock struck midnight, Adam took Emma's hand in his. I don't want to lose you again, he said firmly. Let me stay. Let me help you. Let me be a part of your life, and Clara's. Emma smiled through her tears, nodding. I'd like that, she said softly. I'd like that very much. Clara leaned her head against the arm of the couch, her eyes heavy with sleep, but her heart lighter than it had ever been. For the first time, she felt like her family was whole. And in that moment, as the 3 of them sat together in the glow of the fireplace, Clara knew they were finally where they were meant to be. The morning sunlight poured into the small house, casting a golden glow over the cozy living room where Clara sat at the dining table with Adam and Emma. The air felt lighter now, as if the weight of years of separation and struggles had finally lifted. There was laughter, shared smiles, and a palpable sense of hope filling the space. Clara looked at her parents, marveling at how different her mother seemed. Emma's posture was no longer burdened with the heaviness of guilt, and her eyes, though still recovering, were brighter, full of life. Adam, too, looked younger somehow, as though reuniting with Emma had breathed new energy into his soul. It felt surreal to Clara, seeing them together after everything they'd been through. A letter lay unopened on the table, its elegant script bearing the name of a prestigious conservatory in the city. Clara eyed it nervously as she sipped her tea. She had applied weeks ago, with Henry's encouragement, but now that the response had arrived, fear crept in. Are you going to open it, sweetheart? Emma asked, her voice filled with gentle curiosity. Adam nodded in agreement, his smile reassuring. Whatever's in that letter, Clara, you've already made us so proud. With a deep breath, Clara set her cup down and picked up the envelope. Her hands trembled as she tore it open and pulled out the letter. She read it silently, her eyes widening with every word. What does it say? Emma asked, leaning forward. Clara looked up, her face breaking into a radiant smile. I got in. They accepted me into the conservatory. Cheers erupted in the room. Emma clapped her hands together, tears streaming down her face. Oh, Clara, I knew you could do it. Adam rose from his seat, crossing the room to hug Clara tightly. You deserve this, Clara. Your talent is a gift, and now the world will get to hear it. Clara laughed, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. I couldn't have done it without you both, and without Henry, Laura, and everyone who believed in me. That evening, the family decided to celebrate. Clara invited Henry, Laura, and a few close friends to their home. Henry arrived with a bouquet of flowers and a bottle of sparkling juice, congratulating Clara with a warm smile. You're going to be a star, Clara, Henry said, handing her the flowers. But no matter how big you get, don't forget about us little people. Clara laughed. I could never forget you, Henry. You gave me my first stage. Laura chimed in. And your first mask. You've come a long way from being Nightingale. As the group shared a meal and stories, laughter filled the room. Emma, now more at ease, even shared tales from her youth, earning amused smiles from Adam and Clara. The sight of her parents sitting side by side, smiling and exchanging affectionate glances, filled Clara with a warmth she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, she truly believed that things were going to be okay. The days that followed were filled with preparations for Clara's move to the city for conservatory. Adam insisted on helping her find a place to stay, and Emma worked tirelessly to make sure Clara had everything she needed. You'll write to us every week, won't you? Emma asked one evening as Clara packed her belongings. Every week, Clara promised, smiling, and I'll come home whenever I can. Adam walked into the room carrying a small wrapped package. I have something for you, he said, handing it to Clara. Clara unwrapped it carefully, revealing a delicate gold locket. Inside was a picture of her as a baby, cradled in Emma's arms. On the other side was a small engraving. For Clara, our shining star. Clara's throat tightened as she looked at her parents. Thank you, she whispered. I'll wear it every day. When the day of her departure finally arrived, the family stood together at the train station. Adam placed a protective hand on Emma's shoulder as Clara hugged them both tightly. You've made us so proud, Clara, Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. Go and show the world what you're capable of. Adam nodded, his voice steady. And remember, no matter how far you go, we'll always be here for you. Clara stepped onto the train, waving through the window as it pulled away. Her heart ached with the bittersweetness of leaving, but it was tempered by the excitement of the journey ahead. In the months that followed, Clara flourished at the conservatory. Her talent and passion earned her recognition among her peers and teachers, and her performances began drawing crowds. Every letter she wrote home was filled with excitement about her progress, and every reply from Emma and Adam was filled with pride and encouragement. Meanwhile, back in their small town, Emma's health continued to improve, and she and Adam grew closer each day. The love they had thought was lost forever blossomed anew, and their home became a sanctuary of warmth and happiness. One evening, as Clara stood backstage preparing for her first solo performance at a major concert hall, she held the locket in her hand and closed her eyes. She thought of Emma and Adam, their unwavering support, and the love that had carried them through their darkest days. When she stepped onto the stage and began to sing, her voice soared, carrying not just her talent but the story of resilience, love, and second chances that had brought her to this moment. In the audience, Emma and Adam sat side by side, tears streaming down their faces as they watched their daughter shine. Clara's voice filled the hall, her song a testament to the unbreakable bond of family and the power of hope. As the audience erupted into applause, Clara smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning of a bright and beautiful future for all of them. The story of Clara, Emma, and Adam is a reminder that no matter how challenging life becomes, love, determination, and hope can overcome any obstacle. Together, they found healing, rediscovered lost love, and inspired one another to dream again. Clara's journey from a desperate girl singing in the town square to a celebrated performer is a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the power of family. If you found this story inspiring, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales of hope and resilience. Let Clara's journey remind us all to cherish our loved ones and never give up on our dreams.